BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast. This time, rural communities say they're concerned they won't be able to take over threatened pubs following the closure of a government grant scheme.
It's a real shame that there is no longer this pot of money. It'll be very, very difficult for any volunteers, groups who want to buy their pub to do it. The pubs will be turned into houses.
We'll have more on that a little later. First today, millions of tiny plastic pellets known as nurdles have been found washed up on the east coast of England, leading to concerns about their impact on seabirds and marine life. The Coastguard has said it's likely the nurdles came from the collision involving a tanker and a cargo ship in the North Sea off East Yorkshire last week. Nurdles are balls of plastic resin used in plastic production, and although they aren't toxic, the Marine Conservation Society says the pellets could be mistaken by fish and seabirds for food, leading to starvation and serious health issues. BBC's Debbie Tubby has been speaking to Nick Atchison from the Norfolk Wildlife Trust.
It's very concerning for a whole range of reasons. And obviously, we don't want plastic pollution on the beach, but also the nurdles and the plastics themselves can be tainted with other chemicals, which can be directly toxic. But we know that there's a big problem with plastics, that in natural environments, they become degraded, they become microplastics, and then they get into the food chain. And we tend to see these things in abstract terms as, oh, this is bad for wildlife. But we have to remember that this is our environment. We are all inhabitants of the natural world. And what we do to the natural world and has a negative impact on wildlife ultimately also has an impact on us.
So I thought we were just going to be looking for small nurdles and not be able to find them, but actually there's huge clumps everywhere.
Huge clumps all over the beaches. This is blackened and charred and it smells of kerosene. You can really smell the fuel, perhaps it's coming off it. You can see on this particular one, this whole thing is made up of those teeny tiny plastic resin nurdles.
And it's just all been burnt together. It's like the size of a car roof, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah, it's huge. I'm Hayley Roan, I'm the Senior Sites Manager for the RSPB's North West Norfolk Reserves. We were horrified when we started discovering this washing up on the beaches, miles and miles of this.
And what's your concern about it?
This is an internationally important area for birds and wildlife. Currently, birds are on migration. It's a crucial feeding area for seabirds. And in a few short weeks, we'll start to see terns and wading birds using these beaches to nest and raise their young. The risk is that birds might ingest some of this stuff, and the harm would be immense.
I seriously thought it would be sort of scraping around today to try and find these nurdles, but there's absolutely huge clumps. Are you confident it can be cleared up and it won't have too much effect on the environment, or is this a disaster?
An emergency response is happening as we speak. We're seeing the Coastguard plane flying over, Coastguards across the beaches, surveying the sites to work out what that response is going to look like. What I will say is we have a period of smaller tides, so we have a small window, 6-7 days, to get this operation underway to clear most of this up off our beaches.
Hayley Roan from the RSPB. All week on Farming Today, we're taking a closer look at how disease is prevented by good biosecurity measures. And as avian flu is currently here, it's something at the top of all poultry keepers' minds. So far this season, the cases of H5N1 avian flu have totalled 48, 43 cases in England, 1 in Scotland and 4 in Northern Ireland. In areas where the disease has struck, poultry must be housed, even in backyards, and across the rest of the country, anyone keeping birds must use strong biosecurity measures. That means preventing contamination between poultry and wild birds, which can spread the disease. So rather than me risking spreading disease onto a poultry farm, I asked Mark Gorton, who runs traditional Norfolk Poultry, to make his own record of his strict biosecurity protocol at one of his sites. Normally, the free-range chickens there, which are grown for their meat, would be running around the fields and the woodland, but now they have to be kept inside their sheds.
It's a beautiful sunny day and we've just arrived at one of our free-range chicken farms. So in order to enter the farm, we have to go through a very vigorous process of biosecurity measures. The noise is foot dipping in the disinfectant. So part of the procedure that we have to follow in order to enter the farm is recording all of our details. So I'm going to write my name and car registration number, my telephone number, where I've been and where I'm going to, in case there's any disease outbreak. My movements can be traced. We're all now dressed in our protective clothing. We have to wear plastic overboots to make sure that our feet aren't carrying in any disease. And we also wear blue overalls which cover up all of our outdoor clothes. We've just arrived at the poultry shed, which we keep locked to stop visitors coming in who aren't following our proper procedures. We're now entering the shed, and in order to make sure that we are completely biosecure, we step over a barrier. On one side of the barrier, it's deemed as dirty, and on the other side of the barrier, it's deemed as clean. And as we step over, we will put another set of overboots on over the set that we already have, so that we are 100% sure that we are not going to carry any diseases or viruses into our chicken shed. A little bit more foot dipping in the disinfectant foot bath. Before we enter the chicken shed, we just have to sanitize our hands using some special disinfectant hand soap. As we leave the farm, it's just as important for us to go through the same procedures so that we don't take any disease away from where we are. So we'll take our overalls off, our overboots, we'll wash our hands with soap and disinfectant so that we know when we leave this farm we are clear.
That was Mark Gorton from traditional Norfolk Poultry. Well, that did sound quite an effort, but poultry vet Dr. Henrietta Codolini-Sims told me all that biosecurity is worth it, and it is working.
Every little action that you take is going to have some effect on reducing the chance of that virus getting to those birds. And I think when you look at the numbers, it is working. To 40-something outbreaks. But when you look at it, you've got something like, is it 61,000 poultry units registered? It's a huge number. And out of that, that's like a fraction of a percent that's coming down with influenza. So all those actions are making a difference.
Does all this biosecurity make it difficult for vets like you who have to visit flocks? Because you must be going from farm to farm, which is even worse than just dealing with your own farm.
We make sure we manage the risk strategically. So, for example, I'm not going to go from a free-range outdoor flock into an indoor flock after. I would go the other way around. And similarly, you'd go from younger birds up to older birds. So you always manage the risk appropriately.
What about backyard poultry? How vulnerable are they?
So the more likely your birds are to be exposed to wild birds, then we know the more likely you are to get avian influenza. I think sometimes they think, oh, housing is like a silver bullet. It's really not. So I think the data the APHA did was something like a 2-fold reduction if you housed. But if you housed and you enacted really good biosecurity like foot dips, then it's something like a 44-fold reduction. So it's actually really important for backyardies to engage with the full biosecurity requirements. So I've done some videos with the APHA on YouTube just to try and show them this is what you can do with your coop. This is how to make life easier. You know, I understand that some people don't want to be sloshing disinfectant around their gardens when they've got dogs, cats, small kids. That makes perfect sense. So let's not use foot dips. Let's use a boot change. You know, hang up some clogs just inside your door so you can slip onto your little garden clogs, and you've made sure you've not walked through any wild bird feces in the garden, and you're keeping your birds nice and safe.
The main method of controlling avian flu when there is an outbreak is culling the birds and disposing of the carcasses and eggs. How does that work? Because surely if you've got thousands of birds that have been destroyed, what do you do with them? Doesn't, their destruction actually pose a risk itself in spreading the disease?
So it shouldn't do with the way that they've designed that to work. Any material that's potentially infectious, so let's say birds and eggs, they have to be rendered. Incinerated is the second best option. And obviously you're going to have to transport that in order to make sure that is to a rendering facility. So any vehicles you use have to be sealed. They actually leak test those vehicles to make sure that they're not dropping and shedding bodily fluids or feathers or anything else en route as well. And quite often they'll be bagged, sort of double bagged, sawdust layer, tarpaulin layer, everything they can to make sure they're sealing that and preventing shed, because you're right, it would undermine the process, wouldn't it, if that happened.
How far away do you think we are from vaccinating poultry against avian flu?
Well, there's a vaccination task force in the UK, and that is their responsibility to work out when or when not to vaccinate. So I'm not going to go there, unfortunately, but it's something that the APHA and DEFRA and the industry and vets, they're all working really, really closely together on, and the pharma companies, of course, to try and work out a solution and whether that solution is right. Because just because we're used to the concept of COVID vaccines doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same benefits, etc., in birds.
Dr. Henrietta Cordellini-Sims. Rural communities could find it increasingly difficult to save their local pubs following the decision to shut down a government grant scheme. The Community Ownership Fund, which helped groups to buy local assets such as pubs and parks, was set up as part of the Conservative government's Levelling Up programme. The Labour government announced it was closing the scheme late last year, earlier than originally planned. The BBC's Adam Powell has been to 2 villages to hear about the future for communities looking to buy their pubs.
Ireby near Wigton once had 5 pubs. The last of them is the Black Lion. Frequented by Charles Dickens in his day, it was reopened by the current owner 10 years ago, but now he wants to move on and sell.
The Lake District is a fantastic place to be, but when you're in a bit of an isolated village, such as Ireby, there can be a lot of rural isolation.
That's Mark Nellis, the owner of the Black Lion. He wants to see the pub stay open and saw the Community Ownership Fund as a potential lifeline for the village.
As soon as the pub opened, you could see that cohesion start to form again. Houses in the area started to sell that had lay dormant for a while. So I think it was a real fix for the community. And I think if it goes, it'll have exactly the opposite effect.
Thousands of pounds were raised locally and a grant application made. Then the Labour government called time on the fund and the future of the Black Lion was thrown into doubt. The Sampson in Gilsland is on the Cumbria-Northumberland border. It reopened late last year after receiving £215,000 from the Community Ownership Fund. The team behind that bid believe the loss of the fund will make it tougher for rural pubs.
We got 465 shareholders at £1 a share, many buying more than the minimum 25, but for a small community that would be very, very difficult.
Jane McDade is the chair of the Gilsland Community Benefit Society, the organisation that put the successful grant application together.
It's a real shame that there is no longer this pot of money. It'll be very, very difficult for any volunteers, groups who want to buy their pub to do it. The pubs will be turned into houses and lost as a business and a community venue.
A government spokesperson said the decision to close the Community Ownership Fund was due to the challenging inheritance left by the previous government, but said it was introducing new powers to help communities take control of spaces like pubs and rejuvenate towns and villages across the country. Back in Ireby, there's optimism that despite the loss of the government grant, something will replace it to help. Here's Malcolm Boswell of the Black Lion Community Group Limited.
The government has announced in recent weeks quite large investment packages for urban towns. We're just hoping that they don't forget that rural areas are just as in need of rural regeneration.
Malcolm Boswell ending that report by Adam Powell. That's all from us. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Heather Simons. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.